Second. This is called I Did a Thing, and that is a terminology due to our friend Kate here. And it's about us doing things, about the specific things that you've done to kind of put all this mastery grading stuff into motion here. And here we go. So I just want to reiterate what Kate said a second ago. If you have questions for our final panel coming up at the end of the day, go into the Slack and go into the help desk channel and share out with us what we have that's being monitored and scraped up, and we will someone will get to those questions, or at least a big subset of them, during that time. We are recording this session and will be posted later along with the slides, so you can review them later. And you have a button, I believe, that's you clicked that said you are agreeing that your contributions become part of the recording. So thanks for that. And thank you again to College Bridge, our generous sponsors who have been outstanding and incredibly generous and supportive throughout this entire process of building this conference out. They're awesome folks and do awesome work. Thank you, College Bridge. So here's the schedule. This session technically runs through 4:15, but we are going to take a break at 3:15 and go in sort of 45-minute chunks here. After also going on at this time are some do's and don'ts, and there's a reassessments panel. There's a special session for large classes and tech talk. So feel free, to jump over into any of those if you feel like that would be a better use of your time. We're not going to keep score. We're not going to mind it if you do. We'll probably trade a whole bunch of people if this session is anything like any of the others as this goes on. And then we'll have a break. I noticed that the coffee break was twice as long as the tea break. I'm not sure why that is, but anyway, we have a tea break coming up at 4:15. Then our final session along and followed by a wrap up. We're almost at the end of this conference, which is sad and surprising at the same time. So glad you're here. Today, we've got five groups or individuals who are lined up, and I've put these into two parts here. Our first phase of this, which will go for 45 minutes, will be Kim, Crystal, and Stephen, and then we'll take a break for 15 minutes, and then Nolan and Jacob. I believe some others are going to be joining Jacob as well at the end. Okay, and the way we will do this is I will just hand the ball off to Kim to begin with, and she can use her slides to give us her talk. And the abstracts for these talks are all located on the Zoom, on the conference website. I don't have that URL right on top of me, but I will drop that in the chat as we go. So Kim, let me give you control here. Do you have the ability to share your screen, Kim? I need to quit sharing to do that.
I do, but I will not be using it. So
okay.
There we go.
Okay, well, I'll just give you have complete control. You tell me what you need and I'll just hand it over to you then.
Great. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Kim Frith. I teach civil and architectural engineering at the University of Wyoming. This will be my second year, so I'm still very new. I came into teaching and fell in love with it and decided to read every single book I could, including Robert's and many of Linda's. And I took the advice from senior faculty who teach the upper level classes that my students feed into about how there's a lot of gaps in the knowledge. There's things that students can get through a course and progress without knowing a third of the content that they really should know. And that's how I got interested in mastery grading in the first place, was to make sure that we have competency across the entire curriculum and not just really good at 2/3 of the stuff. So the thing I'm going to be talking to you about today was in my this past spring, online asynchronous statics class. So statics is a freshman engineering course. It typically has a very high DFW rate. It's the first in the series of engineering science classes before you get to dynamics, thermo, etc. So we get students from every engineering department, plus some non-majors who are just sort of exploring and seeing if it's right for them. And my concern with this particular semester was students feeling disconnected from each other and disconnected from the university, and also just disconnected from their learning process, because they had not had, this cohort of students had not yet had a face-to-face college class yet. So we offer so many resources to them that they didn't even know they had. So my plan, my wonderful plan, was every week in this course, the students would complete a metacognitive assignment called a learning report, where most of the time it was a survey that asked them, what resources have you used this week? So what days did you go to office hours? Did you go to supplemental instruction? Did you go to tutoring? It asks a muddiest point question. What was the hardest part of this week's content? Um, and it also has them upload a picture of the practice problems that they worked from our online OER textbook. We used Mechanics Map. It comes with practice problems, video tutorials, everything. So it was a good resource for these students who needed something free this semester. One thing that was different is that the first and the last of these weekly learning reports were reflective essays, tying their study strategies to their grade in the course. So the first one was looking back how I got an A in the course. And then the last one was how I actually got an A in the course or why I didn't. And so it was really interesting to see the progression of what they thought they were doing well and what was working and what wasn't. We had a mid-semester check-in with a video reflection along the same lines, and seeing the students really grow as learners throughout those 15 weeks was amazing. We had every week about 90% of the students would do the reports, and they were graded pass-fail. So I'm the kind of professor who likes to give a lot of little things and they're all pass-fail. So the only way to fail it was to not complete it entirely. If you skip a question or you just forget it exists, then that's a 0 for that week. And the scale of these assignments was 150 points total out of 1,200, and you needed 800 to pass the class. So not a huge portion for students who needed an A, but enough to keep them interested in doing it. So the cool thing is, mechanically, this was set up as a survey in Canvas, like a Canvas quiz. And what that means is that every week I can download the Excel results to see, okay, students have stopped going to tutoring, or they've stopped going to office hours or SI or whatever. And you can also see the trends in what's confusing them with that muddiest point question. For example, the entire class was confused on visualizing 3D equilibrium problems. So that helps me shape the practice exam and extra videos that I'm going to create. So, and it's also going to help me prep the next time I teach the course, because I know when in those 15 weeks they hit those roadblocks and they get lost. So one positive outcome that came out of this was we had students, again, part of the survey process was for me to know what they were using, what resources they were using, but it was also to remind them that those things existed. And I had a student who said to me, I had no idea what SI was, SI supplemental instruction, but I went because you told me about it. And then I realized it was amazing. And now I go to calculus and it's helping me in that class too. So that's the best, that's the ideal outcome, is that they actually realize, you know, go get your money's worth. Your tuition is paying for all of these supportive resources and you need to use them. One concern I had with this was, with an online class, I didn't want students to feel like it was one more piece of busy work every week for them. So I kept it short, right? Other than the essay at the beginning and the end, this was something they could do on their phone on the Canvas app. It was a very quick thing, take pictures of your notes. So most of the time, students did them, and they became aware of the habits that were not working for them. So a very common response when you ask, you know, what was the hardest thing you did this week? A common response might be, I was initially stuck on this subject, but then I went to SI and now I figured it out. I'm like, great, that's exactly what we're looking for here. So again, I was a little bit nervous about putting in metacognitive work in an engineering class because it's not necessarily what they expect when they show up on the first day of class. Like, she's going to make us write. I have to write. My first assignment is writing an essay. But getting to know the freshmen in this class was it was amazing. And so in civil and architectural engineering, I will teach those students 2 more times as well. So I already know who has a hard time with this kind of assignment, who has a hard time, they can't actually get to campus on time for tutoring or whatever resource it was. And I think if there was anything that I would change going forward with this kind of assignment is to develop a way to share the outcomes of those reports with each other, right? So with, like, I actually did this one time. One time we had a survey where it was, tell me your top 3 study tips. And I actually only sent that out to the students who made an A on the previous exam. And then I put that into our weekly announcement. I said, hey, if you want to know, if you want to get better in this class, look at what your classmates are doing who are getting the top scores. And it was things like, don't do your homework on your bed, move to another room, get into that mindset when it's time to do your statics. So overall, I think it was a success. It definitely addressed the concern of having them being disconnected with the learning process. So I would recommend including some kind of meta activity with your students, and having it be a short and sweet survey it's really all it took this time. So I will stop for questions.
Thank you, Kim. Kim, by the way, is at University of Wyoming. I forgot to mention her institutional affiliation at the top. So we do have about 5 minutes for questions. If anybody wants to share, you can just raise your Zoom hand there. I see Andrew's got his already up, and I'll get to you in order that I see the hands. Go ahead, Andrew. What's your question?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say, it's awesome to be building in those metacognitive tasks. I have felt the same issue, obviously, with the math class. They're just as resistant. That's all. I'm just giving you props. It's not really a question. I just, kudos for the self-reflection and the making them better thinkers about their own thinking has dividends later on.
All right, thanks, Andrew. Francesca, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so something that I'm interested in is like sharing the response with each other, and using each other's responses to kind of grow. Do you have any more ideas on that point? Because I've been collecting the things and like, oh, I really wish they would see each other's, but I don't know how to frame it in a way that is not going to make them not respond the same way, because others are seeing it, and still kind of have them see each other's responses.
So what I've done before in the fall semester when I was teaching synchronous, we would use Padlet, and I would let the students contribute anonymously. So you could ask a question like, what was the most challenging thing that we covered in today's class? And they fill it out there, and then you can download the Padlet as a PDF and email it out. Yeah, but Padlet actually would be a good one for study strategies, because that's something that's going to evolve throughout the semester.
Thanks, K2, for the example Padlet there. Every time I see somebody use Padlet, I keep thinking like, I need to use Padlet more often. It's kind of an underused tool.
I like to use it when I ask students what they want for pre-class music.
I was curious too, Kim, do you have any of your materials just archived somewhere that you with a link that you could share? I think a lot of us might want to have a look at what you're doing specifically.
Right now, everything is behind a Canvas wall, so I haven't posted anything, but I do have a teaching page that I might eventually go that route. So if I do, okay, I can put it on the Slack channel.
Yeah, I would love to see that personally. Laura has a question in the Q&A. How many students? So this seems amazing for a larger class.
So it was 2 sections, and combined, because they were back to back, it was, I'll explain that in a second. We had 77 finish the semester, and I think we started with 95. So again, it's a high DFW class. But when I say they were back to back, so we had them scheduled with an actual class time so that they could take their exams synchronously. But then when the semesters began, that time was office hours, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And the students could come anywhere in that 2-hour window. They didn't have to come to the one they were reserved for. So.
Excellent. We have still 2 or 3 minutes left if anyone has other questions. Where Nolan's also getting a little straw poll of what disciplines people are in over in the chat. If you could chime in, that would be kind of cool to see. I'm a math person. Okay, well, no other questions. Thanks again, Kim. Very nice, very nice. Thanks for sharing with us. Let's just take a minute to switch over to the next presenter, which is going to be Crystal Lewis from University of South Alabama. Crystal, do you have slides that you want to use?
Yes, I do.
Okay, you should be able to share your screen, I think.
Okay. Get them.
If you're just, whenever you're ready, go ahead and begin.
I'm trying to get it. I'm on 2 screens here, so I'm trying to do a present here. So
yeah,
just a second.
Totally fine.
Okay. Oh, that went fancy. There we go. So this is Transitions from Points to Standards in a Nursing Writing Course, review of an example assignment. So I know several of you know that my husband is Drew Lewis, one of the organizers here, and he's a mathematician. I'm a nurse. And so I've been hearing for years of how great standards and specification-based grading was, but the nursing education is pretty tightly regulated and you can't really do much wiggle room about it. But then I took this evidence-based practice nursing course, which students did not like because it wasn't what we call a hands-on clinical course. It was straight up just learning what research is and what the what evidence is. And in this course, there was 2 major papers critiquing research articles, which again, pre-COVID, they all were like, oh, I'm never going to do that as a staff nurse. And during COVID and after COVID, they've all come like crawling back to me saying, thank you. I know what's true and what's not. So this is also, it was written for if you're new or thinking about going to standards-based grading and you have an existing points-based assignment, how to kind of flip it into as standards or specifications based. So everybody's kind of familiar with points-based grading. I think pretty much this is a very, and I have colleagues in history and psychology and anthropology, so any humanities-ish based, you get a paper, you're lucky if it gives you like this type of rubric for it, that it's just, this is the section, this is how many points it's worth. And so taking that into the specifications or standards-based grading, you can see here the one on the left here, this is the original instructions. And so I didn't actually change the assignment at all when I was made coordinator of this course. All I did was flip how it was presented and put it on a standards-based grading. And so breaking it out. So then instead of just having this like section 2 being all of these, okay, well, there's a lot of words here. It's literally the same questions, but they're just broken into rows. And then as you're grading it, you just say, yes, you got a check mark and the satisfactory, or you kind of got it, you're on that middle ground with the progressing or unsatisfactory, you just didn't quite get the content at all, or you skipped it. So it made it really easy to see objectively for the students what they got, what they missed, where it was, and it made the grading for faculty a lot faster, because you're not, trying to debate, is this 3 points or is this 2 points? It's, they got this, they didn't get that. And so also with this, one thing I learned is you need to define what you mean. So in the original assignments, when another faculty wrote the assignment out. They had this very vague, use APA format, your grammar's good, spelling, title page, reference page format, 15 points. And for the nursing students, was this the first class that they were exposed to APA format as a citation style? And I know we have a ton of math people and engineering people in this call that they're like, why would you even use anything but LaTeX to write? Well, most of the rest of the university doesn't have your brain to use LaTeX. So this is for the non-LaTeX folks out there that are using trying to teach their students a specific writing style. Like, you just break it down. Well, what do I mean by APA format? What do I mean by grammar? Okay, well, this is exactly what I mean. So then the students can kind of use it as a checklist. And then I have these cross references to the APA manual page numbers that they can go like, oh, I don't know what that is. I don't know what she means by that. Your proactive student can actually go look it up and take it over into their paper. And so then finally, one thing that was really hard for me, and Drew had already told me this, but how many of you actually listened to your spouse on the first time or the second time even? But I couldn't give up a middle ground, because there's sometimes that you're like, oh, well, you're on the right track, but you're not there. And so that's why my paper had satisfactory, progressing, and unsatisfactory. But I really, really encourage you, if this is something you're thinking about, pare it down to a yes or a no. It makes it much, much simpler. It makes the understanding for the students more simple, that yes, you got it, or no, you didn't. Even if you were close, no, you did not, you still did not get that. And then give them the opportunity to revise and go back and reflect on it. And that's it. What kind of questions do you have?
And once again, you can drop questions in the chat, or you can raise your Zoom hand and I'll get to you in order that you raise them up. While we're waiting on questions, I just want to say thanks, Crystal. This is really, it's always really interesting to me to hear from the medical sciences standpoint, because in many ways, the health sciences people are like way ahead of the rest of us in terms of using innovative pedagogies, just simply by the nature of what you do. I mean, it's highly practicum based. I mean, it's not, I mean, there's theory involved, but it's really, I mean, it's literally hands-on. And so like with flipped learning, and especially as has a high uptake amongst like pharmacy students and nursing students and so forth. But this may be the first time I've seen a mastery grading talk from a health science person. So I think it's really cool to see y'all use that.
Well, the rest of the faculty and the students did not really like it so much. The only place that it has actually gained traction is in our dosage calculation course, which is what we refer to as math for nurses.
Did you kill the patient with an overdose? Yes, no, that's a very concrete outcome there. Yes, pass or fail. Yep. I really liked, Crystal, the last thing you showed about using just the yes, no only as part of a larger, more complex rubric. And this is something that I've been thinking about quite a bit, like in going back to just simply pass, fail wherever I possibly can, just to simplify things. But I've struggled with oversimplifying in that sense. I think that what you're showing there is a really nice middle ground. Yeah,
and it's not that necessarily you overall passed or you didn't pass on the assignment. Like right. I had it broken down of if you got so many, you could get up to like 3 progressings and still get a satisfactory for the paper type thing.
Sure.
But then it makes it very clear, especially when you're breaking it out individually, what you want for this this very particular student to know about this. Like this has turned out, again, this was not a popular course pre-pandemic, and then pandemic hit and suddenly everybody's consuming medical research nonstop. And so having to actually be able to critically evaluate every single research article, knowing how to change your practice. Like I literally became a nurse scientist for a COVID response team at our university hospital system here. And that was a question that got brought back to me all the time. Well, was this credible? Did they do this methodology correctly? And so that was what we were trying to teach in this course. And so having that yes, no pared down takes a lot of the other cognitive mental load away. And so with your engineering students or your other math students that you're trying to get into metacognitive writing frame, if you wanted to take something like this and put down your expectations, did you do this? Did you not do this? Again, it's a pretty simple transferable rubric to take, but I think a lot of us, and I've actually seen our daughter is an elementary school child, and we see her rubrics come home for projects that look like this. I'm like, well, what do they actually mean? What do they want here? So that's getting Drew and I in a little bit of trouble with the elementary school, but
Good trouble. Good trouble to be in.
it's good trouble, but really making sure everybody's saying what they mean. And I know in nursing, we've not had the best history of that. So I'm taking that from the mathematicians over to nursing and making sure we define what we mean here.
Great. Francesca's got a question for you. Go ahead.
So I mean, this might be kind of more of a philosophical question, but sometimes with the rubrics, we also, I mean, I have been wondering whether or not to put the exemplary columns, right? In which, you know, there is a difference between something just satisfactory and something is exemplary. So did you feel like some of the students wanted to have that exemplary there, or some of the professors did, or is that something that didn't kind of come up?
Well, this is, in all honesty, these students most often were not very strong writers. So again, this was their first professional writing, like their first professional course that had writing as a component. A lot of these students clipped out of English 102, and I don't know how, but they did. And so their writing strength was not up there. So I came across very few papers that I was just like astounded by, but paring it down, I think, to a yes, no, really, like, do I really care completely about their writing style on every single thing, or do I more care that they understand the content? And so that's why when I went to defining my meaning here, if I go back defining what I mean, like if there's something in the writing style, like grammatically, that I wanted to take off, I would put it as a no on one of these body of the paper things, instead of just like being, oh, well, you know, we have editors for that. We have people that specialize in all of these different areas, and we usually don't use, we all talk about interdisciplinary and cross-discipline stuff, but most of us are really bad at utilizing the strengths of our other colleagues. And I think editors are one place that people underutilize their strengths. And if you go to publish in a journal, there's copy editors that fix things that get through. So like you really want to focus more on the content themselves, and that builds them up of like, oh, okay, no, I've got the understanding, and then it gives them more confidence to keep going and pushing the ball forward later.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you again, Crystal, for that really interesting talk. I appreciate your time and your sharing on that. By the way, these again, all of this session is being recorded, and slides will be available after the conference is over. So we'll have all this great stuff at our disposal later on. We're going to now move to our final group here before the break here. Stephen Ulu and Francesca Gandini from Kalamazoo College, just down the road from me, about an hour away in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Home of the beer I was drinking last night, by the way, this conference was over with. And they're going to be speaking on going all in for equity. And so whatever y'all need, just let me know. You should have the ability to share a screen, and just go ahead and take it away whenever you're ready.
Are you able to see my screen?
Yes,
I can see it, yes.
I can see your screen. Can people hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. I don't know if you'll highlight me or Francesca since she's doing the PDF. All right. So I'm Steve Olo from Kalamazoo College, small liberal arts school here in Michigan. And I and my colleague Francesca, we're talking about implementing mastery-based grading. And I guess the thing we tried was really, in my case, just doing a very simple implementation of MBG. I mean, really basic, and still seeing if we get the benefits. So why for me, this was not really kind of an altruistic student-facing thing. If I'm being honest, it was just grading is so boring and feels like it's not accomplishing anything. So it's like Linda Nielsen said yesterday, you know, as an academic, a professor, you want to like kind of take your life back because it's just this soul crushing. You're grading a final, you're seeing horrendous maths, and it's like how much partial credit to give. And it's arbitrary, right? And then, but the things at stake, right? For us, like C- versus a D, it means can you go on or can you not? So yeah, I just felt arbitrary and sucky and judgmental. And so thinking deeper, right? It's not serving this formative purpose it should. Now, in our context, we're teaching a lot of calculus. It's a service course. Students have to take it. You know, they feel like they're bad at math. And this is now where the equity piece comes in, because we talked about equity in our title. We could see this preparation gap, and it manifests in many ways. But I would talk with my colleagues, and it's like, oh yeah, you can see this kid is from this affluent neighborhood. They went to this great high school. They're gonna get an A, and it's frustrating. And other kids are just tracking towards a C or a D. It's like, what can we do about this? We want to add value, right? And kind of everybody should be getting something. So how to address that preparation gap? And so as an early career person, you know, I've learned so many things, whether it's inquiry-based learning, growth mindset, but I would say this changing assessment is the most exciting one to me, where like I feel like I'm actually doing something and seeing results. So in terms of the implementation, we had these learning targets. Initially it was 24, this most recent quarter it was 20 for me. Previously it was too much. Grading on a 4-level scale. We are EMRN, so there's 2 passing grades. It's just kind of you meet expectation and there's like a high pass, and there's 2 of the failing, not passing grades, which that would be cool to talk about in the Q&A. I really like these kind of 4-point scale. And my learning targets really just corresponded to sections in the textbook. And so this is what I mean by basic. Like there's nothing fancy happening here. I just like, look, there's a learning target called 6.4, and that's the arc length section. And the students understood this. Now built in the syllabus were things like, you know, I'm grading you for correctness and your stuff has to be well written, which I loved because with points, this was a struggle, but it has to be neat or you might not get that high pass that you want. So here's an example of a learning target. And for the math people, like this is like an easy problem. That's almost like an easy homework problem. And so can you still get meaningful stuff for this? Well, what I loved was, here's an example of a student solution. So it's an R, so it's not a pass, but it's not abysmal. And they actually got the point of the section, which is they memorized the arc length formula. They could manipulate parametrics. But this crazy thing happened where they could not do square roots, right? It's the freshman's dream where you split a square root as if it's a linear function. And so in this case, previously it would be like, okay, how much partial credit do I give? Because they kind of got the point of 6.4. And I was like, no, this is a serious thing, right? You have to address this. And so it's not a pass, but you can reassess. And so this is why I love mastery-based grading. You feel like you're kind of treating each student on an individual basis, right? They have their gaps in knowledge. We can address those as we move along and we can reassess so my standards can be high. And even the good students, it can always be better. You could write cleaner, your notation could be more careful. So that's it from my end. Over to you, Francesca.
And just to kind of ground us in an example, here we're going to have you meet a student of mine. So, you know, why it is important to go all in for equity. Here is the story of Joy. Joy is a Latina student of color in this two course sequence, which is called Calc with Review. So we put pre-calc and calc together in one course, and now it's just 2 quarters. And so now she's in the 2nd quarter, and she struggled with algebra mastery. So, you know, just doing algebraic manipulations in the first part of the course. And, you know, she did eventually achieve the standard, but she has still troubles a little bit with algebraic manipulations. And, you know, in one of the reflections in which I asked her to read about this math myths, so this kind of metacognitive stuff that Kimberly was also talking about. So Joy said that you can read her words there. So here we're looking at a student who's like needs some time to get it. And this was clear from her assignments too. So the first 5 learning targets, so roughly the first 3 weeks of Mat 111, every learning target was marked R. And so if this was, this was a point at which there was a midterm, that means that, a grade would have probably not been any better than a C, right? But then the 6th learning target, the chain rule, right? Which if you have taught calculus, that tends to be something challenging. She meets expectations, right? And I wanted to kind of go back and kind of see how the system guided her to get there. So because we have the option to reassess all the learning targets, I think what that makes me comfortable to give conceptual and abstract problems. So students need to know the rule, but they also need to use it in context. So that's how I kind of phrase it, using context. And so here for the quotient rule and the product rule, those are the different parts of the problem. They're given the values of the functions, but these functions are treated abstractly. So Joy didn't do great on this one. However, she did pass the next one. And so what happened is that working on the reassessment of the previous learning target helped her build a little bit more of this abstract function notion. And so when she had to work with this chain rule in which you're trying to find the derivative of the composite function using information from the graph. So again, we are abstract. We're taking, the notion abstractly. We're not just given a function, take the derivative, right? We're thinking about how can we use this in any kind of abstract context. So because she came to office hours and she had reassessed learning target 3, she had worked more, she has worked for a while on, how to understand functions more abstractly and get a bit more comfortable right there. And then in class, we did an activity and she actually was, really leading her group in this activity that was using the graph to find the derivative of composite function. So then this was the problem on the quiz, and that's how she met expectations. And, you can see the version 1s, there is a bunch of red and, orange, and those are kind of like the places where she did not meet expectations. But then with the version 2, she actually went back and, met expectation on nearly every target, 15 out of 16. And that brought her to meeting the standard for the quizzes, for the bundle, for the A. I haven't given her the final grade yet because, we're finishing our grades right now. But it looks, if her portfolio is good, it looks like she's going to actually get to the A there. So back to you, Steve.
I guess a quick word about overall impression. So like I said, for me, I feel like I like that I'm treating each student on an individual basis, because again, they can be widely creative, often in bad ways. And it's kind of like, yeah, what is the gap you have here? Can we address this? I'm not necessarily grading less, which it would be nice if I was grading less, but I'm enjoying grading a heck of a lot more and it feels meaningful, right? That I'm not, again, I'm not spending energy deciding about points, but I can spend that time giving feedback. And also I'm able to set high standards, which I previously with calc, I was never sure. I wanted like nicely written flowing solutions, but it was like, how do you assign points to that? And now it's kind of like, it's all part of it. Good math, well written. To pass, you really need to give me all these things. And also it gives us things to talk about in office hours. And that's been cool because I like office hours to be very open-ended. And for some students, that's great, but they're always the ones who never come because like, I don't know what this is, what do I do? And now we have concrete things to talk about, right? What is wrong on this quiz? How can I fix it? How can I do better next time? Next slide, Francesca.
Go ahead. Yeah, so, we do have some continuing challenges. To be able to reassess, students have to get feedback on time early. And so that can be a challenge. And then there can be unpredictable and overwhelming labor for us as the professors and for the students. And so these are challenges that we are still dealing with. And I think that's all we had prepared. So we're really happy to hear anyone's opinion or questions.
Thanks, Francesca and Stephen. Kim has a question. Go ahead.
I think this is amazing how you broke it down into specific quizzes. My question is, it looked like you had 1 to 4 for each quiz. So does that mean there was 4 questions on each quiz?
No, those are the 4 levels. So E, exemplary, for okay, Moodle hates quizzes with letters. So in Moodle, you can only give numbers in quizzes environment. Don't know why, that's how it works. So I just translated EMRN into 4, 3, 2, 1.
Carter has a question in the Q&A. He's asking, did you use any other assessment types besides quizzes? And if so, were they graded EMRN or something else?
So I think here we have something a little bit different between me and Steve. So you want to go first, Steve?
Sure. Yeah. So in my mind, quizzes were the main type of assessment, but there was written homework, as we always have. There's some online homework. And those 3 were the main things. I did away with exams. So yeah, these quizzes were just taking the place of exams. Quizzes every week. So they'd be assessing 2 or 3 new sections every week, plus doing old stuff. Now, the written homework, to kind of achieve some unity, we have TAs who grade written homework, but each question was being graded on a 0 to 3 scale, which is the same way I was grading quizzes. So it was kind of like a mini version. You can get a 0, 1, 2, or 3, and 2 and 3 are the passing grades. So kind of a mini version of what's going on is what I had my TAs do. Now, that still kind of feels like points. All your homework would be added up and you'd get a percentage. And so what I said was, for example, to get an A, you have to hit 90% on the homework. And then you also have to pick up so many passes on quizzes and so many high passes, that kind of thing. So the homework factored in, my logic being that getting that 90 on the homework is easier. Getting it on the quizzes is a bit harder, right? Passing, you need like 15 out of 20 quizzes to be an excellent pass. So I told the students, pay close attention to these quizzes, but really the 2 things were independent. You have to hit the minimum requirement on quizzes and on homework. And that system could use some tweaking. Francesca?
Yeah, I did the quizzes exactly as I did the homework exactly as I did the quizzes. So, I was thinking about the quizzes are synchronous assessment and the homework is asynchronous. So each one of them, again, by the TAs, but was graded EMRN, and then they could reassess. So they didn't get points for them. They either got an M or an M plus. And if they just got 1 point on the quiz on the homework, that would not count. So they were graded the same exact way, homework and quizzes, and with the optional reassessment. And I also had a final portfolio for optimization problems in calculus, because those are I just find them totally unfair to be graded, to be done in a quiz. So I'd rather have them really write a nice solution to an optimization problem with, with good, with lots of time, which I can write the explanations. And so that is only assessed with the portfolio, the learning target, no quiz, no homework. So that's kind of the only way. And the problems on the portfolio are graded EMRN, and they need a certain number of M's to get each grade.
Great. We have time for one more question if anybody has any. Kim?
Can I ask another one? Okay, so what comes up often when I try to approach other faculty with this idea is they say, how many times does a student need to show you they can do the thing before you know that they can do the thing? So with your quizzes, would one question on a quiz be enough for you, or do you put 4 or 5 on a quiz? And if that's the case, if they make a small algebra problem on 1 out of 5 things on a quiz, do they have to redo that? That's kind of 2 questions.
For me, I think most quizzes, it wouldn't be more than 3 questions. A lot of them were 1 or 2 questions. I wasn't very harsh with small algebra mistakes. Again, it depends on the mistake, and then I make that judgment call, right? As kind of the professional, how serious is this? Because you can tell, is it a transcription? Is it a small thing, or is it a deeper thing? But yeah, my quizzes would be 1 or 2, sometimes 3 questions, and it's kind of a package deal. So yes, if there's a small error on just one of them, then I get to decide, is it a pass or fail? Then I'll say the 4 level, I like the 4 levels because it's kind of like, it's like a binary tree. You make these 2 decisions. Is it a pass or a fail? And then beyond that, what kind of pass or fail, right? Is it good or not? Overall, overall, the system worked out okay, I thought it was. But yes, the quiz is this bunch of problems that are a unit together.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. I mean, I have used EMRN and written about EMRN for a number of years. So I was in love with the EMRN for a very long time. But I have to tell you, I'm not using EMRN because something maybe you can help me with. I had a lot of trouble figuring out the difference between an E and an M in my system, because like E was like, you know, it's like especially great, right? This is like an excellent thing. But then, you know, maybe they would spell their name wrong or forget to put their answer in a box. And then I'd have to think like, well, is it still excellent if their answer is not boxed? And like that distinction for me became really hard, you know, to distinguish, right? So there were lots of M's that were like very, very, very great, but I always had the trouble. So what was your philosophy in figuring out between an E and an M? Like what was your, how do you make that binary tree split?
Stephen, before you all answer that, I just want to cut in. I'm sorry to do this, but it's to cut in and say we're technically on a break right now from 3:15 to 3:30. So we can continue discussing, come in and out as you want to, go get yourself some tea if you want to. We'll reconvene back here at 3:30 and head on into Nolan's talk. Thanks. Carry on.
So I have a
think-
short answer for that, but
Yeah,
you know, maybe you have a different one. Mine is E means explanations. Because on the calculus level, that usually is where the difference between the M and the E is. If you just give me the answer with minimal explanation, that probably is going to be an M. If you are explaining this very well, like to the level in which, you know, you could talk about this and would be great, that's the E for me. But
Yeah,
maybe
it's kind of similar for me. I think like with the example you gave, Kate, I just give it an E, like the boxed answer. I mean, it depends on how you've trained them. And if you made a big deal, right, that it has to be presented this way, then sure, it would be an M because they didn't hit that. For me, I don't think I explicitly trained them in kind of how to write it, except as we go along. There's just things like messiness, and there's the way students throw equations all over the page, right? Eventually they get to the answer and all the ideas are there, but it's not linear. And so I really don't like that. So for me, that's a big one where that'll cost you the E. It might even cost you the M. So for me, I didn't struggle as much with the E versus the M. E was just kind of our explanations there, and does it look pretty nice?
Okay, that's awesome. Maybe I'll go back. I'll probably will.
Yeah.
Never happy.
Oh, also, I
Okay.
should say the reason I really like that system is, for me, the E's, picking up the E's is how you go for an A or a B as opposed to a C or a D. So to get the D or the C grade, you did not need any E's. So if you go in knowing you want a C, you could just pick up M's all the way, right? But if you want the B or the A, you have to get the E's. And so there's, you know, those students who like, they know the stuff, they'll write it pretty nice, but I can be like way more pedantic and just, yeah, I mean, they're just things. Maybe you're doing integrals, right? And the whole U sub and did you change the bounds? Okay, that's not the best example, but because it's kind of serious. But many students would be like, okay, maybe you change the bounds to U bounds. No, forget to change the bounds. So they keep writing the wrong bounds. At the end of the problem, they remember to switch back to the original variable, and it all works out. So it depends on how I'm feeling. That's definitely not an E. It might be an M. It shouldn't be, but it might be. But again, the E standard.
I guess right. That's the thing. Is like this emotional investment in trying to figure out the right answer in my head. Like, is this paper an E, or is this solution an E or an M? Like that's what I was trying to get away from. Back to what Crystal suggested in that Drew is suggesting is like having fewer criteria to pick from made my life a lot easier. And so I gave up EMRN. So now I'm just using SGN. So I've got a successful or like a still growing, like if I'm really impressed, like I'll just tell you, there's no different letter that you get.
I think in the back of my mind, it's this idea that the E is those students going for an A or a B. Maybe that helps me decide it. It's kind of in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, okay, you want an A. So like, you really have to impress me for this E.
Yeah, I feel similar, but then I always kind of not do it in the sense that, I feel like it's already hard enough to earn the M's. And if they get 15 out of 16 M's out of my learning targets, they will get some kind of A, even though I'm like, maybe, I wrote that you should have 5 E's, and maybe they don't get the 5 E's, but they get at least an E. I'm like, sure. So I feel like I felt the same about the E's, and then I kind of forget about it when I'm computing the final grades.
Yeah. All right.
Well, that's exactly, Kate, that's exactly why when I was starting to formulate my course, I actually had EMRN, and then no, because I had other faculty that were grading with me and they didn't have the time to learn. And so I shortened it to 3 categories. And even at 3 categories, there are some areas that was still like a little too subjective, but just recurring, encouraging them to come back and revise anything that they didn't get correct, and giving them an opportunity. Like if they truly are motivated, they'll take that opportunity to go back and revise. And so then it take that deliberation out of it, and that am I at the beginning of my grading? Am I 2 lines into my grading? Or not that anybody else drinks while they grade anything. But sometimes I find myself I'm not being consistent enough across my own grading.
No, that was a huge, one of the pushbacks that I've gotten over the last 8 years about all of this stuff is that, especially faculty new to this idea, will say, well, doesn't it take you so much time? And now I just think about, is this problem worth 9 out of 14 points or 10 out of 14 points? Like that cognitive decision, those decisions take a ton of time. If you want me to know if this person passed this calculus quiz or failed this calculus quiz, like I can tell you that from 20 feet away, right? That's a very easy decision, but figuring out like, okay, out of 19 points, is this worth 16 points or 15? And what did I do 7 papers ago for the student that made that same mistake? I don't want to invest my time in that, right? I'd rather invest my time in like figuring out if EMs or S's are like the better letter to use. It's all a time sink. All right, well, I'm going to go grab some water, but feel free to hang out and chat. If you're coming in or out of this space, we'll resume with our panelists, with our presenters in 7 minutes. You guys feel free to chat while I'm gone.
Maybe I'll make my E an M+, since I'm already calling them M+. Maybe it's just gonna be,
It's
MRN.
still an E.
What? But I'm not gonna record it as an E. Like I'm just gonna write M+ there for like to tell them they did well, right?
They're going to come and ask for a quantification in their grade of the difference between the M+ that they got and the M that their friend got.
I think, thankfully, I haven't had to face any of that.
On the homework, I got some students who got an M because I didn't explain something fully. Like the graders really got my message of like E means explain.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they wrote just the final answer to something without a good enough explanation, they would get an M. I'm like, oh, why did I get an M? I will get some of those on the homework. Like,
interesting. Yeah, I think for me, maybe because it was online and they weren't talking to each other as much, I didn't get much of that. But when I was grading points, right, that would be a thing. It would be like this midterm, like, look, how come my friend got, I don't know, 8 out of 14 and you gave me 6 out of 14? And now, for me now, I'm comfortable. I feel like I can justify whatever I give them because there's comments on the quiz, right? There's always something. If it's an M or an R, it's because I've told you these are the things I saw that I did not like. And then often the E's, I have no comments to make. It really was like excellent. It was correct. It had explanations and it flowed.
If it takes me 15 seconds to look at it, it's probably not have any kind of thing being triggered, and that's what any is like.
Triggered. It's interesting, this whole discussion of like the 4 levels versus 3 versus pass fail. I was thinking about that all the time because I feel like doing mastery is you're going more and more discrete, right? And it's like, where do you stop? It's like percentages is like almost too continuous. So it's like fewer. So maybe pass fail is like the ultimate, right? But I don't know, I'm very happy with the EMRN.
So far I've been like the decision tree is something very sellable, and I think also works for graders. I think also it's been much easier to get the graders to grade more stuff because it's much quicker now.
Yeah, I need to debrief with my graders about that. Yeah, I don't know their impression of using the system.
Maybe I'll go grab some water too.
Okay, everyone, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your break, and I hope you enjoyed that first phase of our talk. So we're going to move into our second part now, starting with Nolan Fossum from University of San Diego, who's going to be speaking on pillars and practices, equity grading to motivate all students. Nolan, let me get out of your way here, and then you have the con, sir.
Thanks. Hey, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm an adjunct at the University of San Diego, my third year, and this framework I'll be talking about was something that came up this most recent semester in my college algebra class. It was the first time I had taught college algebra for this institution. And last December, when I was asking folks like, hey, so what do we cover? Nobody could give an answer. And I later learned the history, and I don't know if they're politics so much. Inside of that was there's just were different schools of thought and no consensus. So the question just gave silence. But to frame this talk also, I guess I have to share with you that a lot of my work, and probably my primary work, has also been in high school. And so I sort of am thinking always in terms of both scenarios. I've been adjuncting for 20 years, not always at this institution. So they're both sort of essential. Anyways, I gave a 1 hour version of this talk yesterday, but it turned out I only got halfway through it. So I think it's really a 2 hour talk. And everybody says essentially something that's similar to, this is really interesting. I need to think about it. Maybe we can chat later. So I don't know how much sense I can make of this other than just sharing my experiences and some of the underpinnings. But if you'd love to connect with me or have more to share or feedback, you can see my contact info here on the screen. My Gmail's great always. My San Diego account is also great. Okay, let's see if I can figure out how to advance my slides. So I thought I'd start by sharing with you just two. I could have honestly selected probably from about 20 comments that were similar to this. These were offered to me about 3 weeks before the end of the semester. I had a meeting set up with the faculty at USD in the math department to talk about what I had been trying and to see if anybody else, well, first, if they thought I was a total kook, but then second, if anybody else wanted to partner with me for this upcoming semester. And so these are just a couple of quotes from students. The prompt was, what do you want the university to know about this course? So these, and by the way, I should say that the course catalog at USD defines college algebra, or defines the college algebra student as a student who has skill deficiencies. So that's sort of the label that they come into the course assigned with. Of course, that's not surprising. But the general focus was students left there feeling different than they'd felt. And we did a ton of reflection, a ton of journaling. And these students, as most of them honestly, but these two also had very, very negative identities and experiences in math classes previous to this. So I thought those were nice because that's sort of what I was hoping for. And I didn't have a very clear direction of where I was going when I started. It was sort of like laying each track of the, down as the train is approaching. So this image for me captures sort of where I've been at. I've been in a space for a while thinking and reading about equitable teaching practices, and yet my grading and assessment has always, I did the math yesterday, and if you look at all the grade books I've run, it's 230 grade books or something over the last 24 years that have always had categories for tests, quizzes, and homework. And so I just saw this disconnect between the things I wanted and the values versus what I was actually using as instruments for recording value. And that's sort of where this was born. I started by just getting rid of those quiz categories. And my first thought was, okay, let's go standards-based. I attended this conference, as the parts of it that I was able to last year. And I had a lot of ideas. I was troubled by some logistics. Like personally, I'm just not that good. That's one of my growth areas. And so as I kept thinking about it with this college algebra class, a few new things emerged. And so this is sort of my 3 whys, why I'm using it. Number 1 is I want to redefine student evaluation in light of what I value. And I felt like the usual instruments of quizzes, tests, homework weren't really, it wasn't like a perfect overlapping circle with what I valued. I was giving kids grades and credits for things when I wasn't really sure what they knew. And some kids were getting undervalued because probably issues with my instruments. And that's just sort of something that I think we know we always face. Secondly was I hated this idea of points. I hated conversations around points. And I was tired of the students' values and the students' interactions being based around what they need to do to improve their grade. So I was trying to do something to shift that frame of mind as well. And then ultimately I was looking for a way to rehumanize what I think is super imbalanced, which is this idea that we're here to learn and journey, and your goal is to grow more independent, yet I'm the sole authority, ultimately, in a sense. So what I found was by working in something that I think was a fairly dramatic shift, I ended up having all of my practices, curriculum choice, instructional planning, the tasks I'm choosing, my assessment instruments, all of it ultimately changed. So I can just scratch the surface for you here, but essentially the pillars is the student-facing piece of the framework, and the practices is my teaching piece of the framework. We'll get into the pillars after we talk about the practices, because I really felt that both of these were mind shift, and I got to start with my own mindset shifting before I can really expect students' mindset to shift. Okay, so I chose to use the standards for mathematical practice out of Common Core. And it isn't so much that I'm in love with these standards. I have mixed emotions about them. They're a little confusing. But ultimately my goal was, if I'm gonna move away from tasks as the focus of this grading system, so then the conversation's like, how come I got this grade on this task? What about my grade in the class with this collection of tasks? I didn't want to be thinking about tasks. So I ultimately started thinking I was going to move into an alternate standards-based grading where the standards were not content standards, but practice standards or habit standards. And these are the ones I chose to use. Ultimately, though, as I've developed this, I'm pushing myself towards an ungrading model. So I don't know that we'll have time to talk about it here in these few minutes, but for sure, if you have more questions or thoughts or want to know how it's gonna, if you want to see the train wreck on my side next semester as you're considering adjusting for yourself, by all means, reach out. So I just chose these because it was the start of the semester and I needed to get a syllabus together. And I stuck with them for a while, even though these don't have to be the practices. But ultimately my goal was, let's center habits. So instead of a student being told you're doing this task or you're working on this content standard, which of course we're doing as the foundation for the tasks, instead the goal is today you're going to be modeling with mathematics, and tomorrow we'll be attending to precision in tomorrow's task, or it's usually, of course, a combination of various ones. So when I started out, I had a gradebook with these 8 standards, and it wasn't going to be task oriented where they would do something and then get a mark and that mark would persevere, but it would be developing or dynamic grading within those categories, those only 8 rows or columns in the gradebook throughout the semester. That was in my pre-ungrading days, so that's adjusted. The pillars is the student-facing piece, because I don't really want the students to be trying to parse the language of the math practice standards. That's hard for anybody. Definitely not something I would expect students to try and master. So I broke it down into these 4 things. It was 3 when the semester started, and then authenticity emerged as the 4th one. And so this is where ultimately, I would spend my time trying to get the students thinking about, this is what your classroom interactions look like, engagement. And these are things we'd have to discuss. Maybe as a group with students, we could build norms and understanding around what these things are. Understanding is a little bit more content focused. I mean, that's the one that's primarily how are you doing with the content of the course? Communication is not just the idea of keeping me in the loop if you're going to miss a class, but it's mostly we're doing a lot of writing in class. I use a lot of Desmos, especially last semester when everything was remote, but I will continue to, and that gives me a chance to get that window into every student's thinking as I'm asking them to explain their reasoning or think about the reasoning of other students. And the authenticity piece is that piece that's look, I just don't get hung up on the cheating. It's there, and I know I'm not good at catching all of it. And I know that there's an inequity in which students get nabbed for cheating and which ones don't, even though they may still be. And that was something that was coming up a ton in March of last year, when all of a sudden school was closing and professors were freaking out about how they were supposed to give their assessments. So all of these things together sort of guide the students' thinkings and behaviors. And we sort of work through those things as we go. The part that I didn't include here because I didn't know how long this was going to take was I've been reading 2 books that have sort of been changing my thinking more over the last couple of months. One was Dr. Goldie Mohammed's Cultivating Genius, where she's talking about the learning pursuits of the 19th century Black literary societies. And in her more recent talk, she's added a 5th pursuit. And those pursuits are identity work, skills, intellect, and criticality, and then she's added joy. And she was one of many who've been sort of helping me focus that so much of what we do in the math classroom has just been focused on skills, standards. Even if it's conceptual, it's still in the realm of the math skills that are decontextualized from like the human side of things, to the degree that we don't pull in, an important problem, or the intellectualism that goes with that when we actually do take the math and look how it's applied, like in gerrymandering, for instance. But the identity work and the criticality, the idea that she describes as sort of that lens of like, how do we look at systems of power and oppression in light of what we're doing in each and every class? Those are just things I just wasn't doing. So as I'm trying to work that in, this is sort of where I got. Anyways, we could talk more about that. The last screen I want to show, if I can figure out why I'm not advancing, was if you want some of the resources and things I'm thinking about or the larger presentation, you can hit me up here at this bit.ly. I'm actually in an airport and I'm hopping through security in a few minutes. So since my time has just about expired, I want to see if there's any quick questions or thoughts, but otherwise I'm hoping we can keep this going online.
Thanks, Nolan. If you have questions, you can leave those in the chat, or you can raise your Zoom hand or put them in the Q&A. And we do have about 5 minutes for questions. Okay, Kate, go ahead.
Oh, so I'm really interested in this as somebody that also teaches a lot of college algebra as, my bread and butter day job thing. I would describe our college algebra as extremely highly coordinated with a very specific set of tasks associated with targets that number around 400 for our term. So I'm just wondering how I could do this. And so like how what are you teaching? Or like I don't even know what my question is. I love this idea, Nolan. How is it, like, what are you teaching alongside? Like, what's in the understanding side of stuff?
So essentially this last semester, I hadn't really done all this other reading and work yet. So it was mostly still just skills based. And so we had the same units, everything from linear functions through whatever seems to come at the end. I had 2 things going for me. One was there was no coordinated effort at USD. And 2, we were still in a pandemic in a virtual space. So I knew that I could fumble and make mistakes and not get through everything because no one was expected to get through everything. But that's the stuff that I don't have the best answer for because I still haven't figured out how that's going to look in a return to something that's less abnormal, or at least differently abnormal. I have 2 professors, maybe 3, that want to coordinate with me. And I know that where I probably am like, who really needs that topic? They will feel differently. And so I hope to have a better vision of how that looks at the end of this next semester.
Thank you.
Stephen, you're next. Go ahead.
Could you say more about the 8 practices and kind of, you said it's dynamic. How are you keeping track of that?
Yeah, that's actually why I moved more to ungrading, is because that was still hard for me to look at something they were doing in a Desmos activity, which are already created as rich tasks. And so I could see them, persevering in a problem or whatever, but it was still hard. My scoring rubric was basically great, pretty good, not bad, not great, which is super subjective. And so I just sort of like looked at a progress over time of if they were getting more towards great and farther from not great, then their score would go from a 5 to a 7, ultimately to an 8 or whatever. I didn't love that part of it because it still felt like a construct that was as arbitrary as anything else. So that part wasn't perfect.
But are you basically judging their performance on an activity based on those practices, whichever 2 or 3 are being tested in that.
Yes. Although now it's no, because I'm moving to ungrading. Thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks, Nolan. Any further questions for Nolan before we let him off the stage, or quote unquote? All right, thanks again, Nolan. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Our last group here is Jacob Kodas from University of Portland, along with Mel Hendrickson and Mummy Wentworth from Wentworth Institute of Technology. So I will turn it over to you folks.
Okay.
Slides visible?
Ready? We ready to start?
Yes, please go ahead when ready.
Okay, cool. So welcome everyone to No Freaking Out, Specs-Based Grading Reduces Student Anxiety. I'm Jacob Kodas.
I'm Mel Hendrickson.
I'm Mummy Wentworth. So we're gonna start with the evidence of this claim. You can see in the graph that the students who took a specs-based grading class ended with the less anxiety at the end of the semester compared to students who were in traditional grading class. The students who participated in this study are those who took differential equations classes at Wentworth and at the University of Portland. In each school, we had students in specs grading class as well as traditional grading class. So next we want to describe a little bit about how each of us implemented specs-based grading. So at Wentworth, we had 28 specs related to course content, and we assessed those specs in 9 assessments in class. We provided up to 3 retakes that students took outside of class time, and each of the specs was assessed by either pass, in progress, or not yet passed.
So then when I was teaching differential equations at University of Portland, I had a kind of a similar scheme. I had 26 topical specifications. I just did 4 assessments and they were all in class. I didn't do any out of class retakes. So it was just like 3 days during the semester and then the final exam period. And I scored everything on a 4-point scale. So 4 was, what a lot of people have been saying today is excellent. It's completely correct and clear. Showed all their work and everything like that, and then kind of goes down from there. I should also mention that one of the things that I think I've learned this weekend at this conference is that I've been using the terms specs grading and standards-based grading interchangeably, and I think what I'm actually doing is standards-based grading. So you'll have to forgive the top of this slide, but anyway, that's what I did. So then at both institutions, we gave students a survey where we asked them to rate the amount of anxiety that they were feeling around test taking in our class as compared to other math classes that they had either taken previously or were taking at the same time. And so we just had students rank assess their anxiety on a Likert scale from 5, which is much more anxiety in this class compared to others, all the way down to 1, which is much less anxiety. And so then to bring it back to the graph that we showed at the beginning, so the x-axis here is time over the course of the semester. The first time that we gave the students this anxiety assessment was right before the first exam. And what you can see is that for both the specs-based grading cohort and the traditional grading cohort, they're both pretty much in the middle, right? 3. So they say, well, I'm feeling about as much anxiety in this course as I am with any of the others because it's just starting, right? But then over the course of the semester, you see the 2 diverge. And by the end of the semester, when we gave our 4th assessment, which was right before the final exam, you see that the traditional grading, on average, students are feeling a bit more anxious than they were at the start of the semester, whereas the specs-based grading cohort is feeling less anxious. And just to dive a little bit deeper into that previous graph, here what we're showing are the percentage of students that reported each of the 5 Likert scores. So on the left, we have a figure for the traditional grading cohort, that's our control group. And what you can see is that on the first survey, which again was right before the first exam, we have something that almost kind of looks like a normal distribution, right? We have the majority of the students saying that they feel the same anxiety in this course compared to others, and it drops off in both directions. And then if you look at that orange dotted graph on the same left figure, that's at the end of the semester, and it doesn't look that much different. I mean, it's still, we have a plurality of students saying they feel about the same. If you look at the percentage of students that say they're feeling much more anxious about the course, that's actually gone up quite a bit. So not that great. But then if you look at the right figure, that's our specs-based grading cohort. The first survey, again, we have a plurality of students saying about the same anxiety, but by the end of the semester, and this is really the key point, the orange dotted line is monotone decreasing, right? So what that means is that we have a plurality of students saying they feel much less anxiety in this class, and the smallest proportion of students saying I feel much more anxiety in this course.
We also asked students what their thoughts and feelings were about the course and specs-based grading in the course. And one student said that the test structure of specs-based grading actually allowed the student to learn more and to be less stressed about, less anxious about the examinations. Another student said that specs-based grading was just a large stress relief for them. They liked the ability to demonstrate their mastery, not just at a single point in time, but rather have a longer opportunity to do that, because the student felt that it took them a while to really absorb the material. Another student said that specs-based grading was a bit confusing in the beginning. We heard this from a number of students, but then once they got on board, and this was true of this student, that they ended up really liking it and felt that it helped them in their learning. And then another student said that, again, they experienced a reduction in stress surrounding the assessments, and they contrasted that with what they perceived to be the high stakes that usually surrounds assessments in a college setting. Now, these are 4, we think, pretty representative remarks and feelings from our students. There were some students that pushed back a little bit in terms of just the number of assessments that were necessary in the class in order to get students to be able to retake the specs. But for the most part, students received it very well and felt that it assisted their learning and reduced their stress. So in the first attempt in both of our courses at both institutions, if we were to assign grades based on that first attempt, you would see that we would have had a significant number of D's and F's in the class and a much fewer number of A's. Now, admittedly, students in this course knew that they had additional assessments in front of them. So some students procrastinated in applying themselves. We know that because they told us that. But nonetheless, this first assessment did not demonstrate the level of student learning that we were hoping for. But after 4 assessments, that picture turns around completely. We have a significant reduction in the DF percentage and a significant increase in the number of students who are really mastering the content. Now, one might expect this to happen with multiple assessments, but we really feel that if we compare this to what was happening in our pre-specs grading version of the course, that we were really seeing students that were mastering the material at much higher rates. So for this implementation of specs-based grading, we found that it did in fact reduce student anxiety associated with taking exams, as well as improving grades overall for the course. Thank you very much. And we'd be happy to entertain questions. Oh, I should say too that the results that we presented here are in a paper that was recently published in the Cody Journal. So you can see a much more in-depth discussion of these results there. Thanks.
Great. Thank you all so much. We do have plenty of time for questions, so go ahead and put them in the chat, in the Q&A, or raise your Zoom hand and we'll get to you. Or I will get to you. Okay, Stephen, go ahead.
Just a basic question about that, the last chart we saw. That was grade for the whole course, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
And the 4 attempts, so in both institutions, was it a total of 4 attempts?
So it was a little bit different at our 2 institutions. So at the University of Portland, it was just 4 attempts total. That's correct, yeah. At
Wentworth, we had 4 attempts total for each of the specs, although they were clustered in assessments, how we administered those specs, or those assessments for the specs.
Okay, just making sure I understand. So when you say 4 attempts, that's like, we could call that like 3 reassessments. Is that how we're counting these?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Is there a particular reason you arrived at 4?
Mel, you want to take it?
It was kind of, our 3 too few or 5 too many. We, at least Bobby and I at Wentworth, we set out planning to do 2 reassessments. And then we realized that there were a number of students that were still not in good shape after those 3 assessments, the 2 retakes. And we realized that we've kind of removed their hope. So we decided to add a 3rd retake, a 4th assessment. And we actually, Mommy and I did that at Wentworth at the end of the term. So that students who had yet to master whichever specs, they had an opportunity to have one last time at the end of the term.
Yeah, I can also say there's a little bit of diminishing returns to it, right? Because if you give students 100 attempts, if they haven't gotten it by the 99, like what is the chance they're going to get on the 100th? And that's just that much more grading you have to do, right? So there has to be some number that you have to settle on. For me, the reason why I did 4 attempts was, it's a pretty dumb reason, honestly, but before I was doing standards-based or specs-based grading, I used to have 3 midterms and a final. That was the way that I laid out my semester for differential equations. And so the first time that I was implementing this, I said, well, let's just replace each of those exam days with one of these days. So that makes 4. There was really nothing more to it than that.
In the chat, I found a link to your paper and I dropped it in there. My computer automatically goes through our university library. So if you're not going through a proxy, it may be behind a paywall. But I'm really thankful that you wrote this up, honestly. It's good to see this in print. One question I had just scanning through here is, did you do any statistical analysis about whether the differences between anxiety for the traditional class and anxiety for the specs grading class were statistically significant?
So we didn't do a formal statistical analysis. No, we did not. Yeah, like on this graph here. So yeah, you could argue, well, are those at the beginning of the semester, are those really the same 3, right? But I would say in response to that we had a pretty large cohort. If you go back to the table at the very beginning, we had several hundred students in the study. So yeah, almost 200 students in total. So we expect that at least the averages should be pretty close.
Okay, Stephen, go ahead, please.
Also, it seems like the way you were doing reassessments was different at the two institutions. Did you guys talk much about that or see differences? Were grades higher when they could do the out of class reassessments?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we were kind of, in some sense, forced to have a little bit of a different implementation at our two different institutions because the course description in the university bulletin is different, if I remember correctly. So there's a few more topics that we cover that they didn't and vice versa. So yeah, it wasn't completely identical. And we didn't look into the grades within each institution any more than the slide that you see there. But we did give the exact same self-assessment of the anxiety to all the students at both institutions. So that part of it was the same.
Thanks for your answers. I mean, as we all are, I'm always thinking about, okay, how many reassessments and what's a feasible workload, right, and also like where they can reassess, right? Because for me, I really want them to do all those reassessments in class, but give them time and yeah, just balancing all that stuff.
Something that my advisor at the University of South Carolina, George McNulty, did for a number of years with this was that he wrote, I think it was probably 16 problems for calculus. And they were based on, you know, this sort of archetype problem. And the first exam contained problems 1 through 4. And then he saw if students were successful. And then the second exam contained problems 1 through 8. But you only had to do one of the first 4 if you missed it on the first go around. And then the third exam contained problems, you know, 1 through 12, but you only had to do problems that you had yet to be successful on. And so it sort of snowballed or it spiraled in this way. And he got very clever with some scripting that he actually printed out different versions of the test for each student. So, you know, every student would have maybe 5 or 6 problems on each test, and they didn't all have to reassess all of the same things on test 3. It was really just the new material plus the older stuff.
That's exactly what I did. Yeah.
I was going to say, that sounds like, you know, that same kind of idea at work here, rather than having a bunch of reassessments going on throughout all the time.
Yeah, we actually did the latter. We didn't combine specs from various assessments the way Jacob did and the way you're describing. We had 6 assessments, and then each of those assessments had different specs in them, and then we had retakes for each of those.
All right, are there any questions, any further questions for this group here on their talk? Okay, well, thank you again. Thanks to all of our presenters here for enlightening us and showing us what you've been doing and the things that you have built. I'm really appreciative, and we have a lot to think about, I think, as we're getting towards the end of the conference. So thanks again. Let me just give a little heads up as to where we're going from here. We're a little early ending. I don't think I've ever had a conference situation where people complained about being done a little early. So we're done a little early. We got until 4:30 to take a break. And then we have our final big session of the afternoon at 4:30, the town hall Q&A. And that is a different Zoom link. So make sure you're going over to the spot on our website where the Zoom links are all posted. And thanks again, everybody. I'll leave this chat room, this Zoom room open for 15 more minutes or so if you want to chat a little bit. And otherwise, I will see you at 4:30 in the town hall.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.